I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand.
Welcome to the first episode for Laymen of the Apocalypse. A show where ordinary friends have slightly irreverent conversations about theology, church, and the Christian life in a world where the sky is always falling.
All right, guys, welcome to the podcast. My name is Matt Johnson, and I'm one of the hosts, and I got with me my two buddies here. They're going to be co-hosting with me. On my left is Brian Daniel, and on my right is Matt Casarella. Brian is down the road from me, like probably 2 miles away.
Yeah, not far.
And then Matt Casarella is all the way across the country in Northern California.
What's up from an undisclosed location?
Deep in the backwoods of Northern California. We're excited to get this party started. So yeah. If you're listening to this podcast for the first time, which chances are you are, if you're new here, so you're probably thinking, what did I get myself into? Well, we're gonna answer the question, what the hell is the Laymen of the Apocalypse? That's what we're gonna talk about today. We're gonna try to figure out what is up with this name, what is up with this podcast, what are we doing here, guys? Like, why would three kind of middle-aged dudes with families and jobs and a lot of responsibility, why would we like spend the time that we're going to spend doing this show? And our hope is in this episode, this pilot episode, we're going to talk about, kind of our motivations, but also like the journeys behind those motivations, like what led us to the point that we're at today. Like, why did we get together? What kind of providence led us to this point where we are talking about, theology, church, and the Christian life. And that's what we're excited to do today. So without further ado, Matt from California, what is up, man? Give us kind of like the big picture. Like, and of course we're all good friends here, but for those listening at home, like what's your journey? Like, how did you get to the point where you decided to do a Christian podcast with a couple of weirdos from Florida?
Right on. Yeah. I mean, that's something I've been meditating on just leading up to this conversation. I think first off, all three of us are conversationalists, and the art of conversation is definitely dying, but making a comeback at the same time, just through different mediums. So that kind of taps into what drove me towards like, hey, I could talk to Matt Johnson. I can talk to Brian Daniels for hours. Like, I think that's our biggest problem as friends is like, the lights get turned off and we're still talking, So for me personally, I really do like the name Layman. I had an opportunity 3 times to be a minister or a pastor in different denominations, and I turned it down. One of the main reasons being I wanted to be me. And I felt like there was all these restrictions that came along with the job title. Oh, sorry, my son's opening and closing a door. He bailed on me. But I'm glad I did it, because once you get kind of slapped with a label or a title, people that don't swim in that pond just don't know you exist. And I've had the unique opportunity of just connecting with so many different types of people through my travels, not just educationally, but vocationally, something that's near and dear to my heart. And I know talking to you guys, near and dear to your hearts, is the priesthood of believers, like all of life being sacred and the ordinary actually being extraordinary when it's breathed on by Jesus. So you want me to share more like my testimony, like how I got into the Christian faith, or kind of more just stay on track with like the podcast inspiration at this point?
I mean, I think a little bit of both, man. But I think that's really helpful. Talking about why we're doing the podcast. But I also want to know, like, kind of catch us up to speed. Like, how did you get to this point in your life, and kind of tell us a little bit about your. You have a really rich background of faith, man. Like you've kind of been in a bunch of different places. Share a little bit about that.
Right on. So, man, it's hard not to get like too deep into the kiddie pool, but my mom was Roman Catholic, dad was Lutheran. I was born, I was baptized, and nothing rocks the boat in a marriage like having kids. So even as like decent human beings, my folks were like, hey, where are we at with like family and faith? So they started exploring different routes, basically just getting into the scriptures more, because unfortunately, more so maybe in the Roman Catholic tradition, there's not as high an esteem of scripture. It's kind of like leave that to the experts, where in your Protestant traditions, you're allowed to pick up your Bible and read it and not, be excommunicated too fast. So just their own personal journey kind of played in to my own. My folks were not hippies, but like pretty close, I guess, without all the drugs. Like, they were just like, hey, watch movies, like consume good art, listen to music. And when I asked them, how do I know what to believe? They said, well, this is what we believe and we think we're right, but go figure that out. So, I mean, I really did. I was just like, man, I got to explore like all these different belief systems, because Christianity's making some pretty like mega claims, just throwing down the gauntlet. And I wasn't like super impressed with the tradition that they unfortunately kind of got their wheels stuck in the mud for a while. And I don't want to hate on anybody out there, but it rhymes with Baptist. So I just kind of went off the deep end, but really I was a seeker. And I'm learning that there's no shame in that. Like, you have questions that need to be answered in your life. And at some point you have to take it upon yourself to be responsible in answering those questions or finding the answers to those questions. And certainly the church played a role. I dabbled in lots of different Christian traditions, everything from Reformed to charismatic. I mean, just across the board. If you had like non-denominational, kind of like somewhere in the middle, like I kind of went through lots of different. I mean, I even went back to the Roman Catholic Church. I was like, heck, I'll check it out, see what's going on here. Wasn't really my jam, but I still have like lots of heroes of the faith in that tradition, people I respect that run in those circles. So here I am today in California, just kind of on that same journey. I attend Bethel Church, which I know is like a curse word in a lot of church circles.
We can't be seen with this guy.
Yeah. It was just, and I'm the furthest thing from a groupie. It really is not my style, but I mean, everybody loves the music, right? It's kind of one of those things where like, oh, don't mention the name, but sing the song. I kind of like to know what's going on behind the curtain. I'm a, Wizard of Oz fan, and I like to get a peek, see what's real. And I'm not afraid of trying new things. I definitely agree with like C.H. Spurgeon, that the doctrines of grace are a preservative that will keep you like fundamentally sound and safe. And I really took that to heart. I was just like, you know what? I am so anchored in the gospel of grace that I can put my faith to the test, and I can venture out and rub shoulders with different kinds of people, because either it's legit or it's not. And I feel like that's kind of on Jesus. That's not really on me. You know, it's like, hey, man, I entered into this covenant with you. And if you don't uphold your end of the deal, I mean, you already know what's going on with me. So I'm just along for the ride, and I might as well have some fun, you know?
It's really, Matt, the one of the things I love the most about you is that you do have such a strong, foundationally like reformed traditional faith that's rooted in the scriptures. And that allows you the freedom to explore other traditions and have conversations with people, and maybe like even try practicing the faith in a little bit different way. Because at times you had attended a PC USA church, you had attended Vineyard at one point. I think you even did like some Assemblies of God, right? At a point as well. But the fact that you were grounded in a faith that has roots allowed you to like continue to explore like what does real faith look like? What does it look like to actually put the confession into action? And I think that is a really cool thing about your journey. And you know what? Like there are going to be people that listen to this podcast and immediately they're going to be like, "Oh my God, there's a Bethel guy on here," and we're just going to say, "Screw you."
Bethel's going to say he's not a Bethel guy. Yeah, right. He does not speak for us.
You know, but that's the beauty of this. Like we got to be mature enough. I think in the Reformed tradition too, like because Brian and I are like confessional Presbyterians. And like we have to get to a point in our maturity where we can like have conversations with people who practice and like live the faith out in a different way. And of course, Bethel is outside of the camp, right? Like, and so talk a little bit about Bethel, man, and like why Bethel? Because that's an important part of where you're at right now. Am I wrong?
No, for sure. I mean, that's a big piece of the puzzle as to why I made a second or third trip out to California. I've been out here a few times in the past. I mean, I graduated from Calvary Chapel Bible College in Southern California. And to be honest, I just got to a point where I was tired of the party line. I have grown up in the church most of my life, and you can kind of tell when people are bullshitting you. Like, you know, there comes a point where it's like the Reformation had to be way more exciting than, unfortunately, what a lot of churches have become, you know? And I want to recapture that energy of like being in the story. So it's not that I haven't met awesome Christians. I mean, that's how I became friends with you guys, was through church connections. I mean, Brian, it was through the Vineyard, and then Matt, it was through EPC and then PCA. We have all just kind of reconvened, you know, through different symbiotic relationships that we share. So it's hard.
I think I said PC USA, by the way, a few minutes ago.
I hope not.
You are a closet liberal. Okay. I mean, we all know it.
All right. Well, if I said PC USA, that's just the wine talking.
I mean, is there any other liberal denominations we want to give a shout out to today? The Unitarian Church of
Wells.
What's the weirdest place you've been in? Because I mean, I just asked that question because I've been pretty bland in my whole journey, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But like, you've been so colorful. Like, you're the opposite of me. I stuck with one tribe pretty much the whole time, and you've kind of bounced around. Like, is this the most unique expression of the Christianity that you've been a part of, this Bethel experience, or what would you say?
No, I wouldn't say it's the most unique. it is unique. I think just because it's in its evolutionary phase still, it's like they haven't hammered everything out and they haven't built their cathedrals and their monuments yet. I mean, they're working on it. But it's just kind of unique to see a ministry that not only brings people from all over the world together, but dude, I meet Presbyterians that come to Bethel. I meet people from all sorts of different denominations and Christian backgrounds that they're all linking up and hanging out at this campus. So just the cross-pollination factor, I think, is what is probably the most unique about it. Because if you saw me at a Bethel church service, you would probably think I was kind of a stiff. Like, I really am not, shaking like a leaf. I mean, I definitely find it to be very stirring, very provocative, very moving. I think there's lots of things that are good that are not publicized, and then there's lots of things that are bad that are over publicized. But it is part of the culture of freedom, where they allow people to act out their gift sets, even if they haven't developed the maturity or the character. And to be honest, I've seen even from the leadership where they've corrected themselves publicly, or they've corrected their own sons and daughters, or have even had to renounce people that just went too far off the spectrum. Like, there was this one guy back in the day, I don't know his name, but he got into like aliens and all sorts of weird shit. And they were just like, yeah, we don't believe that. like we're open to like a lot, but we do have to throw down sometimes and draw the line. So, but that doesn't make the headlines. Nobody really wants to hear that, It's more just like, oh, tell me about the glory cloud and the gold dust. And to be honest, that's like water under the bridge as far as conversation pieces go. It's like, that's one of those freak things that even the leadership is like, we don't know what the heck that was. Like, are you kidding me? Like, how can we even offer an explanation? Like, whether it was somebody, pulling a hoax, or there was some, possible supernatural activity going on. Like, and it kind of breaks my heart that so many Christians are so quick to just assume it's the devil, like, all the time. And I'm one of those people that says, you know what? If Jesus were to show up, either A, I'd have like a heart attack if I recognized who he really was, or B, I would probably not take notice of him. I mean, if we're talking about second coming Jesus, you can't miss it. But I'm just saying, if he just showed up like incognito, like wearing street clothes, I probably would be one of those people that would pass him by. I have to be completely honest. I'm not convinced that if I was alive, back in the day, 2,000 years ago, I would have been on the bandwagon. I probably would have just been indifferent, to be completely honest. So part of me is seeking that experience of encounter, but then part of me is like super connected to like church history and tradition. And that's where I'm like, hey guys, like, it's cool that God is always doing something new, but that doesn't mean he wasn't doing something else. It's
you don't
like,
throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. And I feel like some people are a little just too quick to swing in the opposite spectrum of like, oh, I'm just into what's new and I don't really care about church history, or I don't really care about theology. I don't really care about, what else is going on in the church or what else God has done. I mean, let's face it, there's been movements of God all throughout history, and the opinions have varied immensely as to whether or not, we sit with like the Monday morning quarterback complex and we get to judge history, hindsight's 2020. It's like someone saying snapping a photo the moment like a car accident happens or a lightning bolt happens. It's like, it's a lot harder than it sounds to actually, you know, encounter phenomena. If it were super easy, you know, like I've heard Brian say, if miracles happened all the time, they wouldn't be miracles, you know? And I agree with that. I think, you know, if supernatural phenomena was just like the norm, then it wouldn't even stand out, you know? But because we see these disturbances or this static or this rippling effect that happens, we're like, well, what is this? You know, what are we looking at here? What's going on?
So Matt, on that note, I think we should plan an episode in the future where we talk about Bethel, but not just about Bethel. We should talk about other movements, more modern movements, because I think that's a topic that a lot of folks, you know, in kind of our tradition, that's something that we kind of skip over, and you know, we dismiss really easily.
Oh, for sure.
So I think that'd be a cool conversation. But for
on a side note, real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I've always appreciated the way that you know the theology, but at some point you step out of the library and you start to try to and maybe see, like, is God still active? Is he still moving here and now? And like, you've almost just never been scared to like get your hands dirty. Cause like, you could go to a church that's comfortable, has everything put together, kind of like mine, you know, but you don't, you go to these places, and then that's like the very place where like you met guys like me originally.
I think you summed it up. I mean, that's my heart, man. That is really where I'm coming from. Yeah, I just want to see like stuff in real time. That's all.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Not just like butterflies on a book pinned down, but you want to actually see it flying around, so to speak.
Me too, man.
Yeah.
I think we all do if we're really honest.
Yeah.
It's the difference between fishing in Lake Michigan and fishing in the ocean, man. I mean, there's no sharks in Lake Michigan. You know, the fish can't necessarily kill you. Like, I mean, and that's the thing. If you're a fishing enthusiast, you're going to go chase after like the biggest fish, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I guess I'm like a church enthusiast, but in the broadest sense of the word, versus just like committing to one denomination. I'm like, I love the church. Like I love like all the different
Capital
colors.
C, Universal Church.
Yeah, and so it's hard for me to settle on a flavor. So yeah, I'm not the guy that's going to eat the same ice cream at Baskin Robbins. I'm going to try a new flavor each time. But I love Baskin Robbins. You know, it's like,
And some of the flavors might be worse than others.
Hey,
no doubt, man.
Hey guys, so before I want to get to Brian's story.
I don't.
But before we go there, Matt, do you have? For those who aren't watching you, like I'm watching you on the video, like what does your family look like? Do you have kids? Are you married? Tell us a little bit about that real quick.
Yeah, right on. So been married almost 12 years. I got 4 kids, and right now I even have a set of in-laws living with us just due to existential crises. But I'm just doing the dad gig, and I think that's something too about being a layman and connecting with you guys, is we're kind of these young dinosaurs, you know. It's like, oh, I'm gonna get married, have a bunch of kids, and you know, just totally saddle up in my 30s, you know. Like, I was talking to a friend. I was like, man, I couldn't quit this if I wanted to. I got 4 kids. You know? Like, man, I am like hooked. Like, I'm a dad. I'm a husband, whether I like it or not, you know? So I'm pretty committed, you know, and committed almost in the sense of like, in asylum.
So 4 kids, and the ages are between what and what? Because I know you were on quite a roll there for a while, man. You were just like knocking them out of the park, like bam, bam,
we
bam.
got 2 sets of Irish twins. So we have a 9 and 8-year-old and a 5 and 4-year-old.
Yeah. So that was wild. And of course we had such great memories, like, cause it seems like we were at a point in our life when we were hanging out a lot. It's like we were competing to see who could like have the next kid. Cause we did the same exact thing. Right. So we have a 5 and 4-year-old too. And you know, that was always it was crazy, man. Like it was just diapers and craziness galore. And you know what's beautiful is now I get to watch Brian kind of go through that. And because now all my kids are my oldest is 4 and he's potty trained now, and he's like going to school like a little man. And Brian is like he's right in the thick of it, man. He's just like babies and toddlers and stuff and preschoolers. So Brian, without further ado, man, like tell us what's up with you. Tell us a little bit about your background. And
Oh, you mean I got to follow up Matt? I thought you were going after Matt.
Nah, man, you are. I'm gonna go. I'm saving the best for last.
There we go. It's true. I mean, it's nothing. I was adopted into a family who ended up struggling with mental illness. It kind of got out of control, and their kind of white picket fence dream kind of came to a crash, and my father kind of had to quit his job, come home, couldn't really deal with my crazy mom. So he inevitably ended up divorcing her. And I think it was just a little bit too late at that point. She developed paranoid schizophrenia when I was 6 years old. And it was basically behind the curtain, because it's like we were, middle class. I mean, it's anybody outside looking in, everything just kind of looked fine. And I just looked like an asshole. You know what I mean? Like I was just a bad kid that they needed to put on drugs. And
when you say drugs, Brian, you're talking about like what, ADHD or what?
Oh yeah, all sorts of medications. I mean, they threw them all at me. They didn't know what was wrong with me, and none of those things really ever seemed to change the direction of my life at that point. And like I said, my father, I was about 12 when he finally did come home, but at that point it was really a little bit too late, and so basically just had to kind of deal with being absent while his wife lost her mind and his children's childhoods were crushed under the wheel of mental illness. So it was like 12 to 15. It was just like in and out of jail. And like
as a minor, right? As a juvie?
Yeah, as a minor, it was juvie. So like, I mean, these are all just like programs, halfway houses, the just normal stuff that like little jerks like myself that you send to at that time, like, cause I hated the world. Nobody was taking the time to enter into my world. And the people who were the furthest thing from a good influence. My father had no idea what to do with me. And was at his wit's end. He calls my biological mother and she starts getting, connected and all that stuff. And, it seemed to go great at first. And I was excited to get to know her, and the first time in my life, I thought I had a mother that kind of wasn't crazy, and so I ended up getting to know her for a little while, and then I think it was like about 13. I was basically desperate for affection at that point in my life. I mean, my adoptive mother basically neglected me and abused me physically and emotionally. And so by the time I got back to my biological mother, I was desperate, and I was just like, I was so receptive to everything, you know, and so she crossed boundaries as a grown woman that she should never have. And it began a new cycle of shame in my life. And so I ended up going down this very dark path. And then at 15, I had one of those like jailhouse conversions or whatever. But it didn't really, you know, I didn't convert and become a good Christian or anything. I was still same old person. I was just like doing it with the Bible now. I was still manipulating people. I was still being an asshole with a smile. And I was still being unkind. I didn't cuss. So as long as I didn't cuss, no matter what I said to you, it didn't matter. Like, I'm being kind. I'm not cussing. Right. So.
And now you're a pretty good person that cusses.
Yeah, I know. I do it on purpose now, I think. So basically I just found a higher authority to be a jerk with, if that makes sense, you know? And so I spent like 6 months, you know, just kind of in my own world and pretending Christian. And then one morning I woke up and my father was having a heart attack. And I ended up giving him CPR. He didn't survive. And they were trying to figure out where I'd go. And so I didn't want to go live with my mother, because at this point she'd already, you know, crossed boundaries that made me uncomfortable. But I didn't really know that at that age. And all things said and done, some reason I landed up at her house. So I lived with her for a while. And it was a perfect school too, because it was huge and I could just disappear into it and kind of lose, just be anything I wanted. 3,000 students. I'm just moved up from Florida. Nobody knows who I am. Like, I do whatever I want pretty much. And so I did. I moved up there, and the abuse continued for a little while until I kind of came to it, and then I started using it against her, because it was kind of, you crossed the line with me. Like, who are you to tell me anything? You know? And so I just learned to hate her. And then I basically decided that there is a girl in Florida, in where I live now, that was my Eden. And so when I was 18, my mom died too, 4 months after my dad. I left that part out. My bad. So I was like up there in the school and all that stuff. So like both my parents kind of died within 4 months of each other, and like separate things. But like, it kind of really just like, it pushed me into detachment. Like, it just like, my natural reaction to things is to detach for safety purposes. But like both of those blows and then everything else from the past, I just became fake, you know? And like, I didn't know how to be real at that point. And it seemed to be okay. 'Cause like, everyone's willing to like look the other way when something shitty's happened to you. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, oh, it's okay. His parents died. Don't worry about it. He'll be fine. You know, he's just mourning or whatever, you know? And so like, nobody wants to challenge you. Nobody wants to press you or even connect with you, because that's a dark place to enter into. You know what I mean? It's ugly, especially with a kid, like an already messed up kid at that, you know? So anyways, I'm jumping all over the place. I didn't get much sleep last night.
No,
Sorry.
man. So I mean, what you just shared is just, is incredibly brave, first of all. And secondly, I mean, it's a story of tragedy, man. It's a story of, a great darkness, that you had lived in. And it's what's crazy to me is that the gospel and God was penetrating the darkness even when you were far from being out of it. And that's the most crazy thing to me about hearing your story is like you're in a relationship with an abusive biological mother. Your adopted mom and dad pass away. Your adopted mom was crazy. And the stress of all of that pushing you to disengage from society and causing you to go and really like trying to figure out where you're fitting in and what boundaries you can push and breaking the law. And it's just, I mean, if ever there was a story that could be a movie, it's like, dude, you've lived it. You've lived this really dark story. But the beautiful thing is that you did run away. You ran away. You came down here to Florida. This is all happening up in Michigan, right?
Yep.
And you came down here, and tell us what happened next.
Well, like I said, it was kind of like my idea, like this was going to be Eden, and so like when you move around a lot, you don't get the opportunity for your past to catch up with you. And so like I just sort of built this facade of who I was. And so like I carried that all the way down here. And when it shipwrecked, I just kind of shipwrecked altogether. Like I abandoned God and decided to kind of find my own way. And I say abandoned God, and I say that in the most loosest of terms because like I was nowhere really near God. I mean, at the most, the closest I was to God was the fact that I was reading the Bible, but cults do that too.
Do you think that you were legitimately regenerated when you were 15 in that jailhouse?
No.
And do you think that you were a regenerate when you came down to Florida and you went headlong into drugs?
No.
Okay. So, but somehow like God is stalking you in the midst of this, right?
He is stalking me. I remember when I was a little kid, like standing in the middle of a thunderstorm, cussing him out. And I'm just like, I challenged him, like I hated him. And like, I just always pursued the opposite of him.
He accepted your challenge.
He did accept my challenge. He really did, man. And I appreciate him for that. So eventually, I started running around and backpacking and trying to find myself and find an understanding. And I never found God. And every time it would be on my way back from the journey that God would meet me. It would be like, I'm going to go find God, and I'd never find him. And then it would be as I'm like limping back home, he'd sit me next to somebody on the bus.
It's always at the end of yourself, man. It's always at the end of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Every time.
It's always at the end of your rope. I mean, it's like when you got no gas left in the tank. I mean, that's when he shines the brightest. And it's not because he wasn't there. It's just we have all of these icons and images and ideas. C.S. Lewis talks about that in A Grief Observed when his wife died, and how he said God is an icon smashing God. Like he loves to like tear down the images, the false images that we build of him, and give us himself. We often are just so content with a substitute.
Yeah.
And, I'd probably push back on you a little and say, does a baby know when it's in utero?
Oh, yeah. Well, my covenant theology would determine that I was elect before I was even in my mother's womb.
Oh, no doubt. But I think the church, we push people out too fast. It's like, oh, you've been saved like a year. Like you should be like a Yale grad by now. It's like, no way. You wouldn't treat your own developmental child that way. I want to be like, you know what, Quest, you're 8 years old, bro. Get your shit together, man, or I'm gonna kick your ass out of this house. Like, he's 8 years old. Now, some people's memories are amazing and it blows my mind. I'm like one of those people that I didn't even know I was alive until I was like 5. And I'm like, guess these are my parents. I guess I live in this house.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, like I don't have like a running knowledge up to a certain point, you know, but I was definitely their kid. And then to process that as a child is an even bigger challenge. I mean, I'm totally like on board with Matt. Like, thank you for sharing that story. There are so many people that can relate to what you just said. And that's the beauty of your story. If I had a question, I would say, and you might say, oh, I was faking it, but you managed to stay like pretty positive. Like you said, asshole with a smile. But one of the things that really attracted me to you as a person was like, I knew you were in a shitty situation. Like, the people that knew you told me Brian's in a shitty situation. But you were you're like, hey, let's go frisbee golfing. Let's go paintballing. And I'm thinking like, you know, this dude's like going through it, but he's still got a smile on his face. And I know we had some, you know, deep conversations that eventually led to deeper conversations, but how did you keep that smile on your face? Why didn't you just, you know, say deuces?
I would say that the smile was there to avoid what was underneath, which wasn't a smile. And I know I was always trying to come up with ideas to connect with people. Cause like, that's all I've ever done is like try to find ways to connect with people. Cause when you lack connections in life, you're obviously going to, you know, come up with compensations, you know? Mm-hmm. So like, that's kind of, I think, what a lot of that was. And it was actually after Christ that I was allowed to frown.
Gotcha.
It was,
you're allowed to grieve.
I was finally able to grieve. I was finally able to take my mask off, I think, long enough to feel the pain. Cause I ran from it.
Yeah.
And I just been running, you know, ever since. And it's like, I was always just trying to avoid almost just dealing with that stuff. It was just like, just keep moving, just keep moving, just keep moving. You know, I was very Dory about it, you know, and it's just like, it's easy to be a Dory. It's very difficult to turn around and kiss your demons on the lips. It wasn't until I had children of my own that I really started buckling down on facing those demons and facing the things that were given to me by the people responsible for my well-being, by the adults in my life. And I'm grateful that God is finally breaking the cycles of abuse, neglect, and just it's just not even caring. Like, all these people were quote unquote Christians. You know what I mean? So it's like,
it's the hardest when you know that, because they're supposed to be the good guys, and you're like, wait a second, they're from the same planet I'm from.
Yeah. And at this point, like, I know I said I hated my mother earlier, and I did at the time, but in my adult life, I've learned not to hate her. But like, that's taken a long process, and kind of realizing as I wrestled with the demon that she gave me. Because like every bit of that abuse, if you are abused and you do not face those demons, somebody after you will have to. They do not stop. They just keep going on. And so I started going back to church with my loser friends, because we were all basically just losers. You know, like we sat around doing nothing, getting drunk 9 o'clock in the morning. And then occasionally we'd be like, you know what, let's go church hopping. And we would. And meeting you at one of those churches that we attended occasionally. And you were one of the first people along my journey who sat down with me, I think, long enough to wrestle with me through my crazy ideas, because I had a lot of crazy ideas. I'm sure you remember some of them. I don't.
Yeah, you were kind of like a Buddhist at the time I met you.
I was very liberal.
At least you were like, yeah, I'm exploring like Hinduism and
everything. I was like, how did they all tie together?
But to be honest, bro, I kind of was like calling your bluff because I was like, this dude's just trying to shock jock me because he's so used to religious people that I almost felt like you were just putting out these feelers, seeing how I would respond.
I probably was.
And we made this conversation just about Jesus because I remember telling you, I was like, look, man, I can't defend organized religion. And that's one of the things I think will help us get back on track even in this conversation is each one of us, our love for Jesus was the biggest factor. It wasn't like, oh man, I had this awesome church experience. Like, how couldn't I be a Christian? No, it was like the opposite. It was like we knew religious wingnuts. And yet we're like, but Jesus seems like he's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And not that we were like completely innocent.
Yeah.
But it was like, let's get back, you know, to this Jesus character.
Yeah.
And I know even knowing Matt Johnson and knowing his story, I mean, he's got just kind of like a total like radical, you know, out of the blue experience, you know, of how his ship did a total like 180 in his life. And that's what I love about both of your guys' stories, which I don't want to tell for you, but I'm trying to create a segue so that we can capitulate into Matt sharing some of his story. I don't know what parts he'll share, but I know it's a wild story, as was yours.
So Brian, before we move on, tell us where you're at today, and are you like, dude, you have a tragic backstory. You've gone through a lot of emotional, mental abuse in your life, physical abuse. I mean, there's a lot of junk up there. Like, where are you at today with your faith and like mental, emotional health?
Yeah, no, I can kind of try to put a bow on it for you real quick. I mean, a lot of it started with my conversations just like these. Like, that's kind of the point of this podcast, is like to try to almost capture the essence of the very conversations that began my walk out of the muck.
Amen.
And so for me, it started like, I mean, clearly I was curious to where I was asking the questions, but this conversation really began with Matt. And from that point forward, I started looking into like theology and not just like, I'm just going to make this up as I go, use whatever Bible verses I want. The Bible's saying something. It means to say something. What's it trying to say? And I went about trying to figure that out. And it was a long wrestling with church history and all sorts of texts. And like, it was an interesting journey, but it ended up with me in the PCA. And the PCA is very, at least the church I attend, very faithful with the gospel, and not just with the gospel.
Shout out
Sunday.
To Seven Rivers. We love those. We love those guys.
Yeah. Seven Rivers Presbyterian Church. Look them up on podcast.
And to toot my own horn, I didn't even go there, and I recommended that church to you, Brian. So, because I remember talking to you over the phone, and you were kind of on the church search, and I was like, dude, check out this Seven Rivers. They preach the gospel, man. And I was pretty stoked that you fell into that.
That's awesome. Yeah, man. I mean, I was in such a cloud back then. I just remember sitting in the pews for like a year thinking to myself, like, this is going to make sense eventually. Like, and I just remember crying and like not knowing why I was crying, but just kind of like, there's something going on, like something is happening, and I just need to stay here long enough to figure it out. And like, you know, it took a little while, but you know, I started really hearing the gospel, and it wasn't just, you used to be a jerk, Jesus saved you, and now it's all on you. It really was this whole, it was the whole package deal.
It's like you are the biggest jerk you know. Yeah. But Jesus still loves you.
You're far worse than you realize that you are, and Jesus is far greater than you realize he is. And it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And it's like when you start realizing who Jesus is, it's like you start running after him. Like, I mean, there's so many religions out there that just never satisfied my palate because it just always left it on me. And when I really understood that God had done it for me, when I was like the furthest thing from deserving, it was like he was making me a bed to just lay in for the rest of my life. Cause like I'd found home, you know what I mean? It was just like everything in my soul lined up with this. I mean, it's just basically been a miracle. It's like the story of the Jesus healed a demonized boy.
Well, I just want to say praise God for people like Matt Casarilla, who is willing to take a kid who is like struggling, like getting drunk in the morning, doing drugs, thinks he might be a Christian, but he's not sure, walks through all of that pain and all of those questions and loves you and demonstrates that love in a friendship. Like, for crying out loud, guys, if you're listening to this and you are a Christian who's kind of living the quote unquote like victorious Christian life, I mean, think about people like Brian who are coming into your church, who not Brian today, but Brian 10 years ago. Like, think about reaching out and being a friend to people who need somebody who is a mature older brother to help walk them through the struggles that they've been having. And this is really why we're here, guys. This is why we didn't get raptured out of here. is because we have something to do.
I'm actually in heaven right now. You guys were left behind.
I know, man. You're in California, bro.
So I think we should just wrap up there. I mean, I think it doesn't really get much better than that.
You're next. Nah, you're on the chopping block, bro.
I mean, it's gonna get cut up, so you got to share something, man.
So I'll go real quick. I just want to say that the idea of doing a podcast has crossed my mind many times. I do a podcast for my business. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a type 4 on the Enneagram. If anybody understands what the Enneagram is, I'm a type 4 with a 3 wing, which means I am a super introspective, like self-judging, individualist who like flicks the middle finger to authority. But at the same time, I've got to perform so that I can prove my worth. That's kind of who I am in a nutshell. I'm a mess, guys. But I was much more of a mess before Christ met me about 15 years ago now. So I was like just living kind of the dream, man. Like I got out of college, started working when I was 21, and started making a good living, and had no interest in God. I was an atheist. I was a liberal. Not to say that all liberal thought is necessarily wrong, but I was the bad kind of liberal, guys. I was like,
he was a Democrat. I'm just playing.
What I would do is I would come to dinner parties with my family, and I would have my sister who was a Christian there, and I would debate her about like evolution, and I would make fun of her, and I would use science to actually make her feel like an idiot. And I would prove to her that there was no God. That was the kind of like atheist I was. I was defending abortion rights with a passion. And yeah, man, I'd done my share of drugs and partying. And done so much before I was 21, it was like not even a big deal anymore. So when I was 21 years old, guys, I was living on my own, making a pretty good living, just kind of living the life. And then one day out of the blue, Jesus showed up in a dark cloud with thunderbolts and lightning and zapped my ass and drug me across the carpet. And I felt like,
Were you having a bad trip?
No, yeah, I did. I must have. In fact, I even asked myself that, not even in all seriousness. What did I have last night? I mean, what is happening to me? Man. Because one morning I just woke up and I was palpitating and having a panic attack. And I kept on coming over this idea because it was still sort of fresh in my mind. My brother passed away when he was only 27 years old, and I was 17. This is before I went off to college and graduated high school.
It's rough.
And honestly, Brian, a lot of your story reminds me of his story when he was young. And he had this really troubled past, and he got into drugs, and he became very addicted to crack cocaine, among other things, and oxycodone later on in life. And he passed away of an overdose when I was only 17 years old. And this thought I never really understood what that did to me when I was just a 17-year-old punk kid. And I didn't really have any sort of faith foundation. I didn't have anybody who could walk with me through such a darkness. So I just kind of pushed it deep down. And I realized that what I had done from the time I was 17 to the time I was 21 was try to fill this gaping hole of fear and shame in my heart with drugs and sex and relationships and performance too. Cause I was a performer, man. I was a +2 handicap golfer. I played in college. I was, a 4.0 student in school. I would do anything to try to bury the shame that I was carrying around. And by the time I had this crazy moment by myself in my apartment one morning where Jesus met me through a severe panic attack, where I started to fear, all of the emotions started coming up, and I started to fear death. I started to fear what was going to happen? What was going to happen if I actually died and I blew it? And I remember for the first time in my life praying to God that day. And I said to God, I got on my knees, and I'm having my heart's probably beating 140 beats a minute. As if you were running on a treadmill. I was just freaking out. And I remember getting on my knees, and I remember praying to God, and I said, God, I don't even know if you're there, but I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Don't let me die. Will you save me, is what I remember asking. And I thought that the heavens would open up. I thought that I would hear angels singing. And all I could remember was a most definite, clear as day. Not necessarily an audible voice, but a voice in my head. Maybe it was audible, guys. I'm not even gonna lie. I don't know if it was or not, but I heard a voice, and God said, no. And I was scared shitless for weeks after this. I'm not joking. I would go to work and try to act like everything was okay, but I couldn't think. I couldn't think about anything I was doing. I was scared. I told my mom at one point, I think, because I couldn't sleep at night. I was having nightmares. And I said, Mom, I don't know what's wrong with me, but if you can get me a Bible, I think I might be able to actually read. If I read that Bible, I think it might help me sleep. I was so superstitious. I was actually thinking the Bible could help me sleep. And so she said, yes, I'll get you a Bible. So she went to my sister, who was the only Christian that I know, an evangelical Christian. And they gave me a Bible, and they wrote down verses for me to read. And I started studying the Bible every night in my apartment. And of course, I'm a single guy at this point in my life. I got all the time in the world. So I was probably consuming I don't know, somewhere between 20 and 30 chapters of the Bible at night. And so I was rapidly consuming the Bible. I started in the beginning, read right through the Old Testament. So probably 2 weeks into this whole thing, right? I get to Isaiah, and I start reading the book of Isaiah, and I start reading about the suffering servant, and it starts to hit me. And I'll never forget the moment, guys. I'm in my apartment alone. It was in the morning, actually. And I'm reading the book of Isaiah, and I'm reading about the suffering servant, about Jesus. And nobody had to tell me. I had to know. I met no evangelist. I read no commentary. I watched no YouTube videos because, I mean, back then the internet wasn't even really that big of a deal. Nothing but the Holy Spirit of God overshadowing me clicked everything at that moment and made me realize I was wrong. He was right. I was broken. He was the cure. He was the great physician. He was broken on my behalf for me. I realized the great exchange in the book of Isaiah. And I just remember tears pouring down onto the pages of the Bible. And I texted, or I might have called, I don't remember, but I called my sister, who was the only Christian I know, immediately. And I said, I think I might be a Christian. Can I come to church with you? So I started going to this church, and this is a church. This is a church that it's fairly not well known, actually. It's called the Christian Church. It's a break off from the Disciples of Christ movement. Church of Christ movement would be another branch in the family tree. So this is basically a Church of Christ that is more upbeat, that has a band, that just basically a cool version of the Church of Christ.
Like a Max Lucado version.
Yeah. In fact, Max Lucado, I believe, is their patron saint.
Oh, he rediscovered the gospel for them, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of like their own Martin Luther. Like, hey guys, the gospel's good.
Yeah. So I'm like, you know, this seems like great. Like, this seems like the right place. I go there. They immediately want to get me in the water to get me baptized. I didn't realize at the time that was part of the deal, right? Like, I told him, I'm pretty much sure I'm saved, but they were like, no, you're not saved until you're baptized. Then you will be saved. And I was like, okay, that's cool. I get it. And they read the Bible verses to me, you know, and I'm like, all right, got it. Okay. Jesus was baptized. I'll get baptized. So I got baptized, even though I was baptized when I was a baby in a Methodist church. But I got baptized for real this time. And so I started reading voraciously, guys. I don't know what happened to me. Like, I was always a good student because it was all about performance for me growing up. Like, not because I love to learn, but because I would love to perform. I love to like get the, hey, nice, got an A, you know, on the report card. It was all about the attaboys. And, but something happened to me, guys. God powerfully came upon me and gave me this appetite for theology and for learning. And so here I am, 21 years old. I tell all my friends, guys, I don't drink anymore. I don't smoke weed anymore. I don't go to your concerts anymore. Here's what I do. I go and serve in the nursery at my church, and I go to Bible study twice a week, and I'm reading 4 books a week at this point in my life. And I started reading all these books and started listening to a thing that started happening at this time called podcasts. This is really when the first podcast started coming out. This was back in like 2004, 2005. And I started listening to podcasts, and I find podcasts from guys like John MacArthur, R.C. Sproul, John Piper. I started listening to John Piper's sermons about don't waste your life. And I started listening to, the whole R.C. Sproul series, everything he's ever taught. And my mind is getting blown, guys. I'm just so alive. I'm on fire. This is basically what I call the cage stage, right? Of Calvinism. I start believing in this thing called the doctrines of grace. And I didn't really understand what it was. So I go and I'm all excited, and I go to my, and by the way, I'm super creative, by the way, guys. I can make things out of nothing. Like that was kind of my deal. In fact, I used to have a ministry when I was a baby Christian called Ex Nihilo, because what I would do is I would make tracks. I would make my own gospel tracks.
I call you Elohim? but like lowercase,
No,
or just
because
L, like Superman. I'll call you
all the
L.
people in the Reform pub are going to call you out on violating the commandment. So don't do that. But here's the deal. I would make my own gospel tracts, and I designed it myself. I wrote the gospel into it, like 4 steps, and explained the gospel to people and handed them out. I started handing them out in my church because I was convinced that most of the people in the church weren't even saved. And I gave one to my pastor at the time of this Christian church, and he looks at it and he reads it and he goes, "Oh, no, not good." Because this is a Calvinist gospel tract, and of course the Christian churches, they're Arminian.
They're hardcore Arminian. Like
they really value freedom. They think you can fall away. They think you can shipwreck your faith.
That's exhausting.
It's really exhausting. But so this begins my realization that, well, this isn't really working out very well, is it? I've been fighting with my pastor. I'm fighting with my sister, who, of course, was her husband is an elder in the church, and so I realized maybe I'm not meant to be here, and I started asking myself, where am I meant to be? Where do I fit in? And I visited a EPC church. It's an Evangelical Presbyterian church in across town from where I lived. And I went there, and the first prayer that started the service was a prayer in reverence, acknowledging the glory of God as preeminent, as the focus of the worship. And then the rest of the worship was focused on the scripture and expounding the scripture exegetically, and I was just blown away. And I was just like, I turned to my brand new wife at the time, and I said, "Sorry, I thought I was this guy over here, but this is clearly where we have to be." And so, we became Presbyterian, if you will, at that moment. And started baptizing babies ever since. Like today, I've got 4 kids. Who have been sprinkled and brought into the covenant of God's family. And I am a confessional Presbyterian. I mean, the funny thing is about this podcast, guys, and I think this is one of the things I like about it the most. Like we're all 3 of us are like train wrecks in our own way. But we're all diverse, right? Like Matt's got this really colorful background. He's been to different churches, and he's been seeking the experience of the Holy Spirit. He's been trying to figure out where God is moving, and he's been on the battle. He's been on the battlegrounds, if you will. And, I've spent time kind of in the ivory tower of the Reformed tradition, but I got burnt out of that myself. And so I went through a season where I was questioning the Reformed faith. I went to visit a Lutheran church. I went and visited non-denominational church. I myself went to the Vineyard at a point in time. And then I came back to the PCA and to Seven Rivers, and that's where I met Brian. And it was funny how God has brought me back into this whole circle, because Matt and I had great fellowship, and our families were doing life together when we were part of a PCA or an EPC plant church, and then when Matt went away, my whole faith fell apart. I don't know what happened. I went through this crisis of faith, and I just recently have had this rebirth, if you will, like a second rebirth, where I've been brought back, and I felt God's powerful, relentless calling. It's just, I thought at a time last year, to be honest with you, like I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I wasn't sure if I was just going to shipwreck my faith and my life and my family. And And God has graciously brought me back. And part of that was through Seven Rivers, and part of that was through conversations with Matt and Brian. And it's funny that they had a relationship before I ever knew both of them. And then of course I knew Matt.
Matt sicked me on you.
And then, yeah, exactly. So Matt told Brian to reach out to me, and I met you there at church, and we've just, I think we hit it off immediately, and we were like, man, like we need more people to have a conversation like this where we can be really real with each other. Brian knows some of my struggles as well. And I think at the end of the day, layman of the apocalypse is a beautiful term. And I struggled with this from a creative perspective. I'm the marketing guy. I run a marketing agency, and I struggled with Brian for a little bit on the words, layman of the apocalypse. I didn't think it would make sense to many people, but it makes sense to me now that I've thought about it more. Because really we truly are laymen, in the sense that we've studied the Word of God. We've gone deep. We've gone to the wells of the past and drank from that water. And we've come up and we've experienced the apocalypse of this world, like the hard reality of this world, the brokenness of this world, and our own frailties, our own sins.
Latter-day Saints was already taken. We couldn't use that one. I was like, how's LDS? And you guys are like, no, dude, it's not gonna work. I'm sorry.
No,
I think I was saying something very profound. I think I was saying something very profound.
He was.
But I can't remember what it is, so it's all good.
You're talking about the name warming up to you, and it just made me think about Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints. But I don't even, want to breach that subject tonight.
No, that's for another episode. So, I mean, to kind of wrap up my spiel here.
Finish your thought. I was following. I think Matt. I don't know what he's drinking over there.
Celebration.
They got some good breweries up there, man.
Yeah, man.
So, like, all I was saying is, the beautiful thing about the name and what we're doing with this podcast is 3
eccentric,
really interesting stories. It's absolutely eccentric. And what I'm hoping that is going to happen is I hope people who are, if you're like me, guys, and you are a performer and you have tried all your life to be good enough, and you've only realized that that's come up short, I pray that the gospel, and just hearing our stories is going to impact you and encourage you. And if you're like Brian and you've had an abusive past, or you've gone through, sort of the hardships that he's gone through, and the addictions, and just the really hard upbringing, parent situation, like so many of us have struggled with that. I pray that his story and his voice is a comfort to you. And if you're like Matt Cass and you're searching for something where God is going to show up and make himself real, and you're wondering if that's ever going to happen, and you're wondering, is God actually moving in my life? I pray that you would experience what Brian and I have experienced through our friendship with Matt, and see that God really is moving, and it doesn't matter, what your tribe is. It doesn't matter what your denomination is. It's bigger than that. The layman of the apocalypse is much bigger than any sort of one denomination or one tribe. It's the gospel, guys. It's the gospel for once and for all delivered to the saints. And I'm hoping that that's what comes across. Awesome, guys. I enjoyed being with you. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch you next time.
Peace.
Try to catch me howling at the moon. Try to catch me howling at the moon.
going to smell like smoke pulling people out of the fire. And a lot of people think the Christian faith is just about not smelling like smoke, and they don't realize that you're going to have to get your hands dirty the same way Jesus got his hands dirty. And actually, he's our inspiration to do this. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any warrant to do it. It says he went outside of the camp